Hey, it's Mikey from Rockin' K. If you don't know who we are, we're a couple doing the DIY homesteading, off-gridding thing here in Germany. So we've got snow today. So it's a perfect day to make a sled, right? Not that kind of sled, but we are building a sled. That's coming up. Hey y'all, so we are in the makeshift wood shop. So what it is, it's an old cow barn. I just, reallocated the space to store stuff and cut wood. All right, so if you watched my last video, you saw that I made a bunch of Christmas trees for a donation for the local church. They're doing their little Christmas mart, and people were sick and they couldn't get the crafts done and stuff for their Christmas mart. And just lo and behold, I had already intended to donate this stuff, because when I've gone to the Christmas mart in the past, there wasn't that much stuff. So I figured, all right, let me give them something so that they can make some decent, coin to, last them throughout the year. And because they do a lot of things, they do little coffees and things like that with all the village women and stuff like that. So that kind gesture turned into a lifesaver for them because of illness and such. They didn't have any crafts. They weren't even going to open their one little booth that they do. So we came to the rescue. We made 16 of those. We made 16 trees total. We made 6 of each, 3 different trees. And here comes the problem. We donated all the trees. So I have 2 problems now. One, there is none of them here on the homestead, and Mama really liked them. So guess what I have to do? Yes, make more. And another thing, it was so popular, the video blew up. It went over 3,000 views in a couple of days. It was amazing and garnered subscribers and everything, and that's great. But what it also did was the local people that saw it, they want some of these as well. I am not a woodworker. I am a mechanic by trade. I've been a mechanic all my life, but I do dabble in woodworking here and there. And, I am not a master carpenter. I don't claim to be a woodworker. I just learned how to make these, and, I learned while making them, and I found an easier way to do it. And for me, you might disagree, you might not, but, we're stuck in the wood barn anyway, because there's snow outside. And so we're going to make a new sled. And it's not that kind of sled. I know it's snowing. It's not that kind of sled. It is a sled for the table saw. So there's a couple advantages to using a sled. It's going to make your cuts more accurate, but another thing it does is, because the middle of the sled is somewhat sacrificial, it gives you the benefit of having a zero clearance, basically blade guide, which reduces the rip out, which is one of the reasons I went to it when I was making these trees. Another reason is because when you're cutting those angles on some of the wood, while you can use a chop saw and get the results you need, sometimes it can get a little dangerous. So if you were cutting these, and this is those pyramid style Christmas trees, that's what this piece of wood is. If you're cutting it, and what ends up happening is, with your stop block on your chop saw, you end up binding between your stop block and the blade, and it will shoot the wood out at you. It will shoot the wood everywhere. It'll destroy the piece you're working on. the potential for danger is big. So I decided when I was making them, I'm like, there's an easier way. I've seen it in the past. I've seen people use sleds. Let me make a sled for my table saw. Now, my table saw is nothing fancy. It is just a Bosch professional saw that, is a job site saw. It has a collapsible stand. It's a tiny table saw. It is nothing like these big woodworkers use and everything like that. It's just your basic run of the mill, buy it at a Home Depot table saw. So I just decided I was going to use the sled because I've seen them used in the past. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new sled, because what I did was, if you look, I'll bring you down a little bit. Don't mind the hand. I used the saw to do both the 30-degree cut and the straight up and down cut. Now, the straight up and down cut, I was doing some other stuff. I think I was doing the middle-sized Christmas trees. And I got in a bind and I needed to get them done, so I just straightened the blade up and went at it. But what I did was I opened up the gap here so that it's not zero clearance anymore. And believe me, zero clearance is where it's at. You don't get very minimal rip out. The cut is so much nicer. You got to rely on having a sharp blade, and the blade is sharp, but you don't get the tear out from the teeth of the blade. Basically slicing through the wood. It doesn't drive it out the bottom and actually splinter the wood. Something kind of like what you see here. If you see, that's tear out. That's what happens when the blade gets stuck on some of the wood and kind of rips it out. Now, this right here on this side, let me get it by the camera. If you look, that cut's a lot cleaner. And that cut was made on the sled, but before I straightened the blade up. So I have to make a new one, because now I'm on the hook to make more Christmas trees. And no, this isn't going to be more Christmas tree making and anything like that. That ship has sailed. What we're going to do is I'm going to show you how I made this and what worked for me. Results may vary, mileage may vary, but this is what worked for me. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to make the sled a little bit shorter from front to back, but keep it the same size left to right. So I'm going to set you up on a tripod, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the base for it. And then I'm going to take pieces from this one, since I already made them, and just move them onto the other. But I'll show you how I made those pieces. So let's do this. So on this sled, like I was saying, I'm going to make one that's a little bit shorter. I didn't need that much space. I needed it maybe, I would say probably about, and mind you, we're working the metric system, I needed it about maybe 25 centimeters. So maybe to about here, maybe just a touch longer. So I'm going to take it to 30 centimeters. So I have to cut a new base. Because obviously this one's ripped out. And honestly, what the tools you see here is all it took me to make it. I needed the drill to do the screws for the wood. And this is going to come in handy when it comes time to square this fence with the blade. I'm going to show you how that's done too, because that is a very important step to getting nice square cuts. So let me take this apart and we'll come back. Okay, so now I got everything apart, stripped it all down, and we're down to just the table saw. So let me flip you around. As you can see, this is just the run-of-the-mill table saw, nothing fancy. But what I was talking about zero clearance, if you look, the gap between the blade and the actual guard is ginormous, you can see. And what this does is, as these blades come down, that gap allows it to rip the wood instead of kind of slicing it. So that's one of the benefits of using a sled. You don't have to go through the complexities of cutting a piece of wood, the shape of your blade guard, and then cutting it and doing all that. It's just, the sled is easier for me. I don't do a lot of finished carpentry. I do framing at most and cutting plywood for flooring or something like that. So, and now that I have a track saw, that's where it's at. But anyway, I digress. So over here, I have a piece of OSB or USB, depending upon where you're from. So we're going to take that, and I'm going to cut it to about the width of the top of the saw, and about the 30 centimeters or so in this direction. So probably about here, something like that. So let me knock that out. So I got the saw set up for the first cut. It actually worked out to about 37 centimeters because I needed the room for the wood on each end. So we'll go ahead and cut that. All right, so now that that's cut, what we want to do is we want to cut it about the width of the actual top of the table. I don't need it to hang over or anything. I'm not cutting anything that big with this sled. It is a sacrificial sled. I'm using nothing but scrap wood for it. So it measures 65 centimeters. So I don't know if I can get it up to 65. Let's see. I can get it to 64. 64 is going to be close enough. So we'll run this out to 64. Double check it. $64 it is. So like I said, I'm going to use nothing but this table saw to make this. So let's cut the next one. All right, folks, so now we got the top cut down, or I should say the bottom. The bottom of our sled is cut. So we're just going to set that here. Now, key to a sled is it's got to ride in these two channels. So when I made mine, I had a piece of really old wood, as you can see. But in making those Christmas trees, I have this stock here. While it's not long enough, I'm just going to show you how I actually made mine. It lucks out that it fits just right in here. So all I did was I took my pencil and I drew a line on it to see how deep I needed to make it. Right? Then I just set my rip fence on there and cut the rails. So now what we'll do is we'll get it set up to mount these rails. And now because these rails are a little bit longer from that longer sled, we have a benefit because what we can do is drop them in here, right? Get them all set. And I can set this on the top. And now I can see both sides of where these rails are. So the first step for me is to get this as square as possible. And the way I was doing it was I was using this front edge. Now, mind you, that blade isn't going to be square as you think it is. But what I was doing is I was using the front edge, so I'll pull these pieces of wood to the front edge. And then I'm going to set my sled nice and square with the edge of this table saw so that everything is pretty much squared up as best as I can eyeball, right? Then we have to attach the runner to the sled. Now, I just happen to have screws the exact length, and they're short by about 2 millimeters. So that's the way I attached it. That's the way I'm going to attach it again. That's the way I recommend you attach it, is get yourself some of the hardware that fits. And I can literally just run these down in. And these screws are nice because they have a little bit of an edge on the countersink that actually cuts themselves into the wood. I love these screws. They're by Spax. So you just want them just under the surface, just flush. And like I said, I'm lucky enough I have the exact length screw that I need. Then we'll eyeball the middle-ish. And just hope that we hit the right spot, which we did. So a lot of you may wonder why I go through all this, because of the issues I had with the chop saw. And believe me, if you guys look at my thumbs, you can see I'm good at hurting myself. So all this is by accident, but I don't need any. I don't need to tempt fate. All right. Okay, so now we have the makings of a sled. You can see, rides in here all nice and neat. So we need to trim off these two little nubs, and all I'm going to do is use my rip fence, set that up, bring the blade up, lock my fence. All right, so now we're ready to do the front and back stops on this sled. I love these saws. You can store the stuff on them. So we're going to run this blade back down. And we'll get her in the groove this way. So the first thing I'll do is I'm going to mount this back rail, because this back rail is not critical and we don't have to worry about whether it's square. We can just mount the back rail and not have to worry about it. So let's do that. So I'm using the wood that I used on my old sled. It's going to be moved over so that it's not in the range of the blade or anything. I just need something to give it rigidity across it. So we're going to use the wood that we used for the other one. Why not? To me, this is a sacrificial piece. I am not intending on using this wood for anything else. And when I'm done, I'll probably feed it to my wood stove. So this one is not as important to make sure it's square. This one is going to just add rigidity to the piece, because where you're going to cut it, you're going to end up with two pieces of board. So you need this to keep those two together. So with that said, what you want to make sure of is that you have at least 2 screws. So you see I have it lined up, 2 screws on one side of the blade and minimum 2 screws on the other side of the blade. And to make sure you don't put them in where your blade is, because you don't want to try to cut a screw with a nice sharp blade, because then it makes it a nice dull blade. So now we have the backstop. Backstop is all done. Flip it on over, and there's our backstop. Like I said, this is just to keep it. We're going to end up scoring this to set the front stop, because this is the important stop. This is the stop that your wood's going to be up against. So you want to make sure that this is absolutely square with the blade, and I'm going to show you the easiest way to do that. So now that we have this set up, we're going to cut partway into this, but we're not going to cut all the way through it, because you don't want this to pinch the blade or do anything like that. So make a partial cut by raising the blade just a little bit. And then we're going to run the sled. Raise the blade a little more and run the sled. So as you see, I didn't cut it all the way, like I was saying earlier. I left this so it doesn't pinch the blade. Now I'm going to back up like this, and now I'm going to raise that blade up to where I can see it. Right? Now I have my blade here, and that gives me somewhere for my square. So now I can take my square and put it on my blade, and then set my front edge. So let's find that other piece. And here it is. So I'll have to turn the square here like that. I'm all nice and flush up against that blade. And now what I'll do is I'll bring my square down and make sure that I am square with the blade. You may think your blade is square on your table saw, and you may, but it's not. Trust me, it's not. I haven't had one yet that the blade's been square with the tabletop. So the easiest way I found is put my square onto the blade itself, and then set the rail and make sure that it's all square with the blade. That'll give you your best results. So I will now take out my handy dandy marking tool, which I'll put right here somewhere. There she is. Sorry about ruffling the microphone. All right, so now that we are all squared up, I am going to draw a line on here. And just to make sure I don't knock it out of square, I'm going to put this on the other side. So now I have my sled square with that. The easy way that I've found to put this all together is to take it and slide it back this way. Well, first we have to drop the blade. Sorry. We're going to drop the blade. Then we're going to slide it back this way till I can just get the screws underneath. Once I get 2 screws in it, and I'm sure she won't move, I can flip it over and put more in it. So let's get let's get a couple of screws in it. Don't forget about your blade path, and you don't want screws in your blade path. All right. Now we'll grab some more screws. Make sure everything is golden. Beautiful. So let me get one more screw in it. Put one right there. Now I can go ahead and flip it over and put the other 2 in it. Excellent. All right, so that's your sled pretty much done. However, we're going to be using this to cut 30-degree angles. So you may notice, yes, I did cut this some, but in my spot where I need to cut, it's not cut at the 30-degree angle. So I'm going to bottom this blade all the way out. I'm going to set my table saw to the 30 degrees. Draw it back. Now I'm going to run the blade up incrementally. I'm going to run it up a little bit and cut my slot. Run it up a little more. And a little more. Okay, so now you can see where we now have a nice zero clearance where I need to cut this wood. So what that'll allow me to do is give this nice clean cuts on my sled, and they'll be totally square. So the nice thing about this as well is you can build yourself a jig. So for this, I need to cut it this direction first. And now you can see it's really nice with no tear out. So now I have the 30 degree this way, and let me find my trusty measuring stick, and it's supposed to be 58 millimeters. Get my pencil and mark it. Another nice thing about the sled is you don't have to mark your piece all the way across to make sure you're getting a good straight cut. You just have to put the tick marks. And let me show you how we set it up. So if you look over here, you can see where the cut actually is. So right there. So if you look, when I set that up, I can set it to where I know exactly where the blade's going to go. So we want it on this side of the blade, like that. And I could cut this a little deeper so it sticks up farther, and that's probably what I'm going to do. I'm going to raise the blade on this pass. But now I know it needs to go exactly right there to make my cut, to make it the right shape. Okay, so now that cut is done. Look at that. Very minimal tear out. Really clean cuts. It'll only take a second with some sandpaper. You can see it didn't blow it all out the way it would on my chop saw. Looks nice. And I can get nice, square, consistent cuts on this with this setup. The sled's easy to make. The one thing you may want to do is if you're actually just doing 30-degree cuts, because I was in a rush and trying to get this project done, I made a straight cut first to square the blade up. You can also square the blade even at 30 degrees. With it at 30 degrees, you can still square your blade, which is probably what I should have done. Hey, I'm not an expert. I'm not a pro, because you can still square off your blade and get the same results. So as you can see, it's still square. It's still square on the blade. I probably should have gone that route in the first place instead of standing the blade straight up. I did that with the other one, but it was also much longer. So hey, I'm going to give you to raw and unfiltered. I'm not going to cover up the fact that I now have a very wide spot in my sled, but it's not the spot I'm using. I'm using here, right here by the fence, to make some of these trees, and that's only necessary for the zero clearance to get really nice cuts. The other key is slow and controlled movements will reduce the rip out. If you try to cut at high speed, you're going to rip out no matter what you got. It's gonna do a lot of tear out. But yeah, I mean, that took no time at all, and now we have a nice sled to cut 30-degree angles, and I don't have to worry about my chop saw sending a piece of wood flying across the shop or flying into me, or possibly putting my hands at risk, which, hey, like I told you, I'm good at banging them up, and I don't need any help. So yeah, that is a table sled all in one shot, and I mean, it works great. I have I was able to make repeats and all that on this. And I'll show you another neat thing is now when it comes time to whether you're doing mass production or you're doing several cuts, Another thing that's really nice about a sled, I gotta bend down and grab a clamp, is when you're doing mass production and you got several cuts that you need to make the same, you can take another block and put it on your rail. So I'm going to flip you around. You can take a block and put it on your rail like that. Take a clamp, and it doesn't have to be a huge heavy clamp like this. This is just the clamp I had here. And now you have repeatable cuts where you can do all your cuts. And this was key when I was making the largest of the Christmas trees, because there's 4 of them that get cut the same length and the same direction and everything. So that's probably what I'm going to start making on this sled today. I've already put out making these things, so I'm not going to put that content out again. Don't want to beat the dead horse. But this allows me, because there's 4 on each tree that are the same cut, I can put this clamp and block on here and just get a bunch out. On that tree, if you go and you look on other YouTube channels, you'll see it's 1 long one, 4 of the same cut, and then 2 that are 2 different cuts. So you can literally, or 3, I'm sorry, 3 that are different cuts. You can literally crank those things out. If you cut, 5 of one, then 20 of another, then 5 of the last couple, you'll end up with 5 of these Christmas trees in an instant. And it doesn't take that much wood to make them. But that's how I make my sled. I'm not a woodworker. I'm sure people are going to chime in and be like, "Oh, that's not how you make it. You should use something a little better like MDF or some high-grade plywood." Look, I'm throwing this thing out when I'm done. So actually, it's going to go on my wood stove. I'll pull the screws out, chuck it in my wood stove, and it's a job site saw. When and if I ever have a nice woodworking shop, I will go for a really nice sled. But this is all sacrificial, folks. I'm not going to make a high dollar, high quality sled when this costs me nothing. This costs me the scraps that are back here, or these scraps that are laying here. I did 1,001 projects and I have all this scrap. Literally, half the trees are scrap wood. So, we make do with what we got, especially today when lumber is so expensive. But that's how I make my sled. That's how I made the Christmas tree donations that went to the local church. And that's how we were able to crank them out. I mean, we cranked them out in 2 days. A lot of it was cut, and sand. And then all the assembly, you saw the assembly. All the assembly was in that video. And you saw it didn't take long at all. So I hope you got something out of this. I hope that you, it helped you maybe cut your own Christmas stuff. Go out there, make some gifts instead of spending that hard-earned cash. And, so in with my motto, if you're thinking about friend, if you're thinking about family, reach out, give them a WhatsApp, give them a WhatsApp, whatever works for you. Reach out, tell them hi. You'd love it to hear from them too. So until the next one, which is tomorrow, because Coffee with the K's, Auf Wiedersehen.